This is the Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trapp. Name a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally. Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network, available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Let's go, business storytellers. We are live streaming everywhere. Not sure the Amazon live stream is currently working, but if it gets to start working here, everything you can see around me, you can purchase on my Amazon store. So even if you're not watching there, Christoph Trapp on Amazon gets you there directly. I'm looking over at the iPad here, seeing what the technical difficulties are today. Today, we want to talk about how do you build your personal brand, what goes into that, and especially the one topic I find super interesting is how do you tie it all together when you work for a company, right? Some companies are very, oh my goodness, sit behind the scenes, be quiet, whatever. That can be very dangerous, right? Because now you might be potentially expandable behind the scenes. Maybe not. But that was one of the topics that I really enjoyed in On Brand, Aliza Licht. She wrote that book, just came out recently. Really glad to have her back on the show. And I'm pretty sure she is the first returning guest, not the first ever returning guest, but the first returning guest that is literally in the intro of the podcast. I don't know if you caught her there, but I'm pretty sure she is the first person coming back after being added to the intro. So let's get the discussion going. How do we build our brand? How do we do that in a way that makes sense? Welcome to the show.
Christoph, it's so great to be here. And I am honored to be in the intro of the show. Thank you so much.
And I just thought about that the other day, actually. I was like, oh yeah, that might be the first person back on the show. And that's like the really old branding too, if you notice. I mean, like we don't even use that software anymore. So just kind of interesting to see how things evolve. So tell us about the book. Very interesting read. Thank you for sending a review copy. But personal branding is important, but what prompted you to write the book and why is that an important topic to you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. Christoph, we live in a totally different world and we work in a totally different world. So my perspective is in this hybrid and often virtual world that we now work in, everyone needs to understand how they're showing up, no matter the medium. And gone are the days of having your credentials speak for themselves. It's our responsibility to shape our narrative, share our vision, and shift their perception. Because if we don't tell our story, people will happily make up their own version of us. And it's important for people to make sure that they're showing up in the way that they want to be and thinking about what message they actually want to put out into the world.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me because, I grew up in a world where everybody said, oh, let your actions speak for themselves, blah, blah, blah. But if nobody ever saw those actions, or maybe more importantly, nobody ever shared those actions and shared what you were about, you're kind of stuck, right? Like, how do people know? So I'm a big fan of building our personal brands, sharing our stories. Maybe that's the way I think of it more often, right? Like, let's do a podcast, let's do an article. Hey, let's write another book. Why not? But how do people get started? How do they determine that they want to do this? And what do they do? What would you recommend as like the first steps?
The first step, everything in On Brand is really about self-reflection. So the first question really is, what do you want to be known for in your circles? A lot of people first think like, well, I'm not an influencer, or I'm not trying to be famous or a thought leader or anything that's public facing, but you're making an impression within 7 seconds of meeting people. And then you're working with people, and we spend more time working with people than we do in our personal lives. So the question is, if people were to describe you in 3 words professionally, what would you want them to say? So in identifying what we want to be known for in our circles, that's step 1. The second thing is to actually shape that narrative. So similar to what you said, I am a firm believer that the strategy of waiting around for someone to notice that you're good at what you do is actually not a strategy, right? So shaping that narrative, if you want to be known as someone, who's really great at marketing or storytelling, whatever the case may be, making sure that, do you actually talk about that, or is that in your bios? Are you communicating that to your network so people know to recommend you? To me, the magic of a strong personal brand is when your name is dropped in rooms you're not in.
It's very true. And what's very interesting to me too is when I was just listening to you talk about what would people say? How would people describe you? And what's interesting to me about that topic too is back in the day, that's all you had to go on, right? If somebody said, "This is how Christoph, this is what he's good at, this is what he does, and whatever," and there's value in that, obviously. But today, if somebody says Christoph is a horrible podcaster, for example, or I don't like it,
No one would ever say that.
well, I'm sure somebody has said it, but you know what I'm saying? Like somebody could say something, and you could literally go watch one of my 600 some episodes and make your own opinion. So it is way easier to prove your point, right? And to kind of own your own name and own your own space, so to speak. But are people taking advantage of that, or is it? Do you have to take more of a publisher's mindset to even get out there?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to figure out where you're comfortable playing in all of this, right? So some people are not people who are game to be on social media, and that's okay. To me, though, LinkedIn is non-negotiable as a professional person. So when we think about our bios, for example, online, or even the low-hanging fruit of like an email signature, right? Like, Christoph, how many people have you seen send you an email that either says, "Sent from my iPhone," or "Excuse my typos"? Like, you're not doing marketing for Apple, and you're telling people that you are not careful in the way you email. So everything that you put out there is a reflection of your personal brand. It's not just what you say and what you do. It's also what you choose to align with, your attitude, your mannerisms, the energy you put off. And if you're building authentic relationships in the world, if you're earning social capital, all of these things come together to really define your personal brand. And to me, again, going back to the idea of like, if you want people to think about you for opportunities when you're not there, they need to understand your value.
Interesting to me too when it comes to excuse my typos. Like if you're a content strategist, quite frankly, like that's what you want to put at the bottom of your email. Hire me for your content strategy or your writing. Oh, excuse my typos. But
Right, exactly. I mean, what does that say? I mean, it speaks volumes.
I mean, seriously, but I don't know. How can there be typos? Doesn't Apple autocorrect everything nowadays, even when you're 20% there?
I mean, autocorrect to words that you didn't intend to say, definitely.
So sometimes that does happen. The one section in your book that I found really interesting, and I think a lot of people, so there's really multiple levels of people who build their brand, right? One is, and people say this to me quite often, they say, "Oh, your LinkedIn is like, it's very consultancy, right? Like that's what a consultant would do." And they're not 100% incorrect, but I do have a full-time job, right, for a company. And quite frankly, like I don't really take any projects outside of that company, So I'm not doing it to actually create demand or get leads or whatever, but I'm doing it to build my brand. And then you have people who do it because they're doing what I'm doing, right? They're building it more longer term. They have it when they need it, even though they might not need it today. How do people get started especially when they work in a company, and how do they deal with that? And I'm sure people will question them and wonder, why are you out there? Why are you being so loud?
It's so funny that there's a negative connotation to this, but when you think about it, there is an incredible halo effect that can come from companies actually embracing that their employees have personal brands, and employees actually building their personal brands and being proud to show where they work. So I really look at it as a win-win. And I think with that, though, you have to understand the rules of engagement, right? Every company has a media policy, right? So if you get emailed from a reporter and they say, "Oh, we'd love your opinion on X, Y, and Z," the first thing you should do is say, "Hey, PR team, is this okay? I would love to answer these questions. Are you comfortable with these questions? Are you comfortable with these answers? And actually partnering with your company to have a voice out there. Now, there are companies who say, we have one spokesperson for the brand and we don't allow employees to speak on behalf of our brand. And that's fine too. But the skill set is still yours, right? So when you think about establishing your name as someone good at X, you're good at writing, you're good at storytelling, you're good at being a lawyer, whatever the case may be, that is yours to talk about. So if we're talking about LinkedIn and building our presence on LinkedIn in specific, you being able to shine a light on what you know as a skill set and your experience doing that thing you do is perfectly just fair game, because really at the end of the day, our names are not on the door, right? Our names are not on the door. And if we're not sort of creating career insurance for ourselves beyond where we work, we're missing an opportunity. Now, social media as well, like obviously every single person, when they post something online and they work at a company, is a reflection of that company. And that's something to think about. But that can have a positive net effect.
It really can. And so let's take that for a second from the other side of the coin, right? I mean, I've had people who clearly were overcoached by PR on podcasts. Some of them, I swear they were reading, right? You could see them go like this. And there's very few people, like I have a whole article on how to use a teleprompter. But in my experience, having worked with people who actually know how to read a teleprompter, there's very few people in the world, maybe that's an overstatement, but there's very few people who can read a teleprompter and make it look natural, or to read notes and make it look natural. So in that sense, they gave good answers, but it wasn't very authentic, right? Because you and I are just talking, we didn't even prep questions. We're just having a conversation. But they gave good answers, but it was like very robotic. So what tips can the PR team or communications team or whatever team is in charge of that external messaging, what can we give them to empower people? And is the danger really that high that we have to script answers for an employee that knows what they're talking about?
Well, I think that when employees are speaking publicly, especially about what they do, they are representing their company. So I think understanding that there's a responsibility there, right? You do need to have alignment. And I'm not talking about doing a media interview, but if you're going on LinkedIn today and you do social media for a company and you're talking about your top 10 tips for how to do social media today with the algorithm changes, like that is not something that you need to ask your company, like, hey, is this okay? Like you can do that. That is yours to share. But you have to understand, like your LinkedIn says where you work, right? So in a way, there is that thread, that through line between what you're sharing and the company. So to me, though, really at the end of the day, every person is responsible. If they want people to know they're good at something, they need to say that, right? And part of what I do in On Brand as far as speaking is also emphasizing the IRL as much as the social media. So when you log on to a Zoom meeting in your company, how you're presenting in that room is a reflection of your personal brand. How you carry weight in a meeting is a reflection of your personal brand. If you are someone who adds value to a conversation, new ideas, innovation, that reflects on your personal brand. So becoming great at public speaking, to me, is a benefit, not just to the individual, but to the company, especially for examples like this.
It's very, it's interesting too. And when I try to help people to start a podcast, or I wrote something on branded podcasts, when companies, I think there's a big value in doing your own podcast, quite frankly. I don't even think about it like public speaking anymore, right? Like when I used to go stand on the stage, and granted, now I sit in this chair most of my time right here in this studio. But like that was very different from like some of these podcast interviews. Even when I go on a podcast, I just think of it as a conversation, right? So let's.
But some people are very scared of even that, right? So being comfortable having a point of view is important. But how do you have a point of view? You need to do your research. You have to prepare for a conversation. You have to know your subject matter. Being a thought leader in any medium means that you're bringing unique ideas and point of views to the table.
It's very true. And I just wrote about that. What's unique content? You have to bring your own point of views to the table. Now, remember, there is no explicit content label on this podcast. So, but I do want to talk about chapter 12 on where you don't really care of some of the things maybe people say and do and whatever. And once you get it going, right, people will have opinions and you're not going to love all of them.
Well, so in On Brand, as you know, it's like a workbook within the hardcover. So you're doing all these mental gymnastics exercises throughout the book. So step one is really doing your Venn diagram and understanding where you have permission to play, what you're interested in, what you want to align with. Then we go into, what is your belief system, right? Because every great brand starts with a belief system, core values, mission statement, vision, etc. And then we get into brand guardrails. And that's really about where do you start your conversations and where do you end them? Like what are the subject matters that actually you shouldn't be speaking about? And I have very clear ones for myself. And I have passed on a lot of opportunities, especially in TV, because of things that I was asked to speak about that are not part of my brand guardrails. Okay. So that is the beginning of all of this, to understand that. When we go to the chapter that you're referring to, which we will not say the exact name because we do not have an explicit label on this show, we're talking about people like the Elon Musks of the world or the Donald Trumps of the world who understand that a controversial statement is going to yield as many lovers as it will haters. And that is okay for them. So the idea of being controversial, a lot of people will tell you that's the number one way to build a community and build an audience, because people who align with you will follow and people who hate what you have to say will follow. But my perspective is you have to sleep at night. And you have to be comfortable with the heat of being that person who doesn't care what people think about them. To me, that is someone who probably owns their own company or doesn't really have stakeholders controlling their brand or their business, because there is a lot of risk involved in that.
It's very interesting to me. And I was just thinking as you were talking, you kind of answered my thought while I was thinking about it. It's like another level too, right? Because if I'm building like this relatively niche thing and it's not that many people or that many customers in the niche anyways, but just enough, right, in theory to make it work. And if I really get them all upset at me, right, and I get some lovers but a lot of haters, maybe I'm running out of people who can love me at some points. And of course, in the case of Elon Musk and Donald Trump, I mean, their audiences are way, way bigger just based on what they're doing too. So something to keep in mind as well.
I mean, Christoph, your show is the business storytelling show. And if you understand your audience and you tailor your content to your audience, you will always reach them.
Absolutely. Now, one thing we don't talk about here too often, mostly probably because I just wear whatever I wear. And but we talk about, you talk about the signature look. And this is an interesting topic to me, actually. How do you do that? When does it matter? And the one example that came to my mind, also Joe Polizzi, who is in the intro, he always wore orange, right? When he founded the Content Marketing Institute. And then he sold it. And today they're still orange and they still use that today and saying, we love the color orange. But the reason they love the color orange is because Joe happened to wear an orange suit one time and somebody said, that's really cool. And he says, that's now my look. So how intentional do you have to be? What does it mean? And how do you apply that in the different channels?
So this is really the chapter that we talk about for visual identity. So for me, signature, I always have a red lip on. And red nails. That's just what I'm comfortable with. That's how I feel best. It's become my signature. And visual identity is a really powerful tool because it can express your brand without saying a word, right? So when we think about your example with Joe, like he became iconically known for orange. So if a logo is orange, he's wearing orange. People associate that. with him. And a lot of people, even for their book tours, friends of mine, they have an image of themselves. Nicole Lapin has an image of herself on her latest book, Miss Independence, with a green dress. She wore green dresses for every single press appearance. Repetition is reputation, right? So when we think about visual identity, what do you want to be known for? And if you consistently repeat that thing that you do, you will become known for it.
And I actually started doing that, I don't want to say recently, but more recently-ish in my career. In fact, I had 3 books and I recently rebranded them as a series of books. So they all kind of look the same, and I rewrote some content in them and moved some content around. But now it's a marketing strategies series. And also the same look, you can also see that on my website, right? The same colors are used. So it's a little bit different from me having to wear an orange suit, speaking or whatever, but certainly it's the same concept. Maybe in the next 3 minutes here or so, let's talk about changing topics. And you had an interesting chapter, or maybe you have it interwoven in the book throughout. But, people say, well, what does that have to do with what you're doing? And you're like, oh, I'm not doing that. Talk about that. How do you change the topics? And then also, how do you not go too far? And I know you didn't do this, but there's many, many influencers out there. They are the expert at topic A, and all of a sudden topic B is trending, and now they think they're the expert at topic B, which has nothing to do with topic A, if that makes sense.
Yes. So I think this is where we go back to the Venn diagram of understanding how these content buckets live together and make sense in totality, which is that center of the Venn diagram. And I this is an exercise in On Brand, and I recommend it for any single person to plot what they do for work, plot what they're, personally invested in as far as causes, activism, personal interests. How do things intersect, right? Really understanding how things intersect. Those are your brand guardrails as far as content buckets. When someone chooses, first of all, I hate the word expert. I honestly do. I don't think we have a better word, but anyone can say they're an expert, right? But how do you actually become an expert in something? When you are consistently sharing your knowledge on a topic. Again, repetition is reputation, right? I have become known for personal branding because it's something that I'm really passionate about and I've spoken about for years and years and years in relation to online strategy. So that is one topic, but I can also, within my Venn diagram, talk about fashion, or talk about social media strategy specifically, or talk about anything that lives within my Venn diagram because I have visualized what makes sense together. When you see this all the time with influencers who all of a sudden get pregnant or have a baby, all of a sudden they become experts in being a mom, right? And it's okay to add on, but you need to bring people along for the journey and give them the context and transparency to understand why your point of view has now evolved into X, Y, and Z, and why you actually feel like you're a person who can speak to that. So it's okay to sort of evolve and expand what you speak about. You don't have to niche down. I don't think having one topic is actually a safe strategy. I think it's better to, again, utilize the Venn diagram to really see the multitude of things that you can surround yourself with from a content bucket perspective. But at the same time, you don't want to come off as someone who's just all over the place.
You don't want to be all over the place, but what's interesting too is there's always different ways to tackle similar topics. And just to mention Joe Polizzi again, he had the Content Marketing Institute, and today he focuses on the creator economy, which debatable. They're not that related, but they're really kind of the different sides of the same coin, right? One is corporate and one is creators, so it is very, very similar when you really think about it. It's not like him moving from content creation to how to bag groceries at the grocery store,
that
right?
Would be a bit disjointed for sure.
Very disjointed. Just a friendly reminder, if you're listening on the podcast channels, make sure you head on over to Spotify and you can actually watch the video version. And once you have the video version, you can always click, it's over there, scan the book, the QR codes. They have made a comeback. This is the last live stream before the summer break. So I'll see everyone in a couple months. The podcasts are publishing just like they always have been publishing. Really appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your insights and sharing your book. The last 45 seconds here, if you can tell me, how do people reach out to you? And also, who should reach out to you? Who do you work with? Really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you.
Christoph, thank you so much. So alizalicht.com, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. You can find me anywhere. I work with brands and individuals on building their brands.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your networks. We appreciate you. Until next time, let the